What's up, y'all? Jarrett Roser of Louisiana versus all y'all, looking back at Tulane's 41-33 defeat of the Raging Cajuns on Saturday out in Lafayette. A game that kicked off at 11 a.m., was extremely hot, low scoring relatively for most of that first half, then turned into a track meet in the third quarter in particular. Ends up being, I think, what I expected, what I think a lot of people expected, a pretty close game for a lot of it. Obviously, an 8-point game at the end of it, a game that the Cajuns certainly had their opportunities to keep control of the game at one point, or to retake control of the game down the stretch. But a lot just came down to key plays in all phases, really, throughout the course of the game. Just pivotal moments, whether the pick six before the half for Tulane, the opening kickoff of that second half for Tulane. And so just huge swings of plays in the course of the middle of that game. And then third downs throughout the game. Tulane ends up completing 9 of 14. They were 9 for 12, I believe, at one point, plus 1 for 1 on fourth downs. And so just the ability to stay on the field for that Tulane offense in key moments. And then on the flip side of that, the Cajuns end up 2 for 9 on third downs, 1 for 3 on fourth downs. And so in an 8-point game, when you change just 1 or 2 of those plays here or there, it changes an awful lot. And I think these two teams, as much as we thought we'd go into this weekend and learn a lot about them, I think we learned some. I think it was a really interesting game where Tulane comes out with a win despite the fact that they didn't feel like they played very well. And so some positives to take from that, but obviously a lot to clean up. And then on the flip side, the Cajuns, with some of those aspects I just mentioned, and throwing a couple of interceptions and having those turnovers be costly, and the kick coverage and different things like that, they were ultimately right there with a team that has, I think, the last couple of years inarguably been the top G5 program in the state, a team that was starting to become a G5 playoff contender type discussed team, and went toe to toe the last couple of weeks with Power 4 opponents in Kansas State and Oklahoma. And so some positives to be taken from the Cajuns as well, even in defeat in their biggest test to this point in the season. And so it'll be interesting to see just kind of how they both respond from this, in terms of Tulane realizing how much needs to be cleaned up even coming out of a win, the Cajuns being able to clean up some of those things, but also realize that they went through their biggest test to date in this season, and can kind of grow from that experience now heading on the road to Wake Forest. Looking at some of the positives, I guess, on both sides of things, both quarterbacks, I thought, made plays at times, particularly escaping some pressure and creating some things, extending some things, whether with their legs on some runs or just buying themselves a little bit more time. That's something I was looking for from Darren Mensah a lot going into the weekend. And I think Ben Wooldridge actually was the bigger story in that regard, in terms of some of the plays that he was able to make, escaping pressure and making some things happen with his feet. Running game for both teams was really big. Mekhi Hughes, I joked with him afterward, the flu game edition of Mekhi Hughes, who was under the weather for Tulane, still ends up matching his career high of 166 yards, had a touchdown. He's just become such a bell cow for that team, and someone that, even on a hot day when a lot's not going right, they know they can rely on to help them set a tone on the ground against anyone who's lined up on the other side of the line of scrimmage. And then at the same time, Draylon Washington, the Cajuns' typical starting running back, still not 100% healthy necessarily, saw a few snaps, but the lead roles going more to Elijah Bill Davis and Zylan Perry, a couple of in-state guys from Riverside and Franklin, respectively. And Bill goes over the 100-yard mark for the second time in his career, had a huge run there in the third quarter that helped answer that kickoff return that Tulane had just had. And so 9 carries for 103 yards for Bill. Great to see for him in a bigger role. I know they've been excited about what they've kind of seen from him thus far. Terrence Carter also for the Cajuns with a career high 79 receiving yards and a touchdown on 4 catches. Lance Legendre from Warren Easton, the former quarterback for the Eagles, now as a wide receiver for the Cajuns. I thought his 3 catches for 57 yards, including a couple really nice catches. Just great to see from him at this point, growing into that new position, game by game, week by week, month by month, just continuing to improve there. The receiving dynamic for Tulane, I think there were probably moments where they would have liked to have gotten some more separation. You didn't see particularly big numbers through the air, but they also went in knowing that they wanted to establish things through the ground game, and were successful in doing that. And so I think some of that was more of an intentional dynamic to lean heavily on the run game in this one. I thought the flip side of both of those quarterbacks being able to get away from some pressure at times, and make some plays was overall, I thought both defenses got after the quarterbacks fairly well. You just want to see them clean up some of the tackling dynamics and not lose contain in some spots. But, there was some pressure brought. It ended up being a huge part of the storyline for Tulane to hold on to the thing late, where they were able to get some pressure on Ben Wooldridge, including a couple of plays where they didn't get home for a sack, but were able to force intentional grounding plays there. I think it was Sam Howard and Tyler Grubbs on those 2 plays that forced the intentional grounding throws by Ben Wooldridge. Grubbs ends up being the leading tackler for the Wave with 6 total and 5 solo. You end up with Sam Howard and Deshaun Batiste getting credit for splitting a sack there. Jalen Geiger and Jack Shinshu, the interceptions for the Tulane defense, I think really nice for Tulane in particular to see Jack get that second half interception, a young guy, a freshman in that secondary that's really talented. To have that play for him to build off of was nice. We had a chance to hear from Jack after the game amongst the interviews, along with Coach Summerall, Mekhi Hughes, and Rayshawn Pleasant, who we'll talk about here in a second. So make sure to check all those out. On the Cajuns defensive side, Carmicah Glass ends up with 7 total tackles to lead all players on both sides. You end up splitting a tackle for loss between Jaden Duggar and Kyron Mims. That was a big one there late in that game. And Amir McDaniel had a tackle for loss as well. I feel like I'm missing someone. Lawson, defensive end. Lawson ends up with a tackle for loss. And then the special teams. I've kind of danced around it a little bit, mentioned we were going to get to Rayshawn Pleasant. He's one of the interviews up on the Louisiana vs. All Y'all channel, and rightfully so. He had that kickoff return early in the third quarter that was such a difference maker in this game. You're clinging to a 4-point lead in a game that is fairly back and forth, and thinking about how you want to go get points and give yourself a little bit of a cushion, and Rayshawn's able to bust the long kickoff return and do that right away. And so suddenly in a game where a lot is not going great for Tulane, you're not executing at the level that you want to be executing at. If you're the Green Wave, you have that cushion because of that kickoff return, to where as much as the Cajuns keep coming after you and are battling, and it's back and forth in a lot of ways, that kickoff return to open it into a 2-score game at that point let you have a little bit of that room for error to kind of keep the Cajuns at bay throughout the second half. And so that, there were some other takeaways there, certainly in the kicking game, a missed Tulane field goal there late by Head that kind of left the door open at one point for the Cajuns, when it felt like there was an opportunity to kind of shut things down. But the big takeaway on special teams is certainly that Rayshawn Pleasant kickoff return. In any event, both these teams now move forward, and I think have some really positive things in front of them. We'll see how they kind of move on from this game, as we mentioned before. But Tulane gets the win in this one, 41-33, a great game that both coaches mentioned they'd like to see a little bit more frequently. I'd love to see it, if not every year, every couple of years. credit to all of y'all that went out there and supported both those teams on what was a hot Saturday morning and early afternoon. And thanks y'all, anyone who has checked out the Louisiana vs. All Y'all channel. Make sure you subscribe, all those things. Until next time, I'm Jet Roses, Louisiana vs. All Y'all, and y'all be well.